Good evening, everybody. My name is Catherine Corey, and it is my deep pleasure to be introducing this event that features two people who are such cherished colleagues and friends for many years. It's really an honor. I'd like to start by just telling you, in case you haven't been here before, a little bit about the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute. And I'll read that to you. Since its inception in 2009, the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute in Abu Dhabi and also in New York has provided a platform for exchange about the newest developments in research and scholarship across the disciplines. The Institute in New York offers Washington Square community opportunities to hear experts talk about their research and its societal relevance, technological and cultural impact, and importance for the world at large, ranging from artistic and creative innovations to public health and environmental sustainability, among many others. As a hub for vibrant scholarly public engagement, the Institute is unparalleled in the Gulf region, and we are pleased to offer programming and extend the Institute's reach here at 19 Washington Square North, NYU Abu Dhabi's home in New York. It has been such a pleasure to be affiliated with this organization, and particularly with the staff here at 19 Washington Square North. So, our speakers this evening, and it is evening even though it's only 5 o'clock, because look at it, right? It'll all change soon, right? The world will turn, yeah. So Abhishek Majumdar is a playwright, director, and artistic director of Nalanda Arts Studio, Bangalore. He's an arts professor and program head of theater at NYU Abu Dhabi. Ruben Polendo, founding artistic director of Theater Mitu, dean of the Tisch School of the Arts, and arts professor, NYU, global professor, NYU Abu Dhabi. Just to tell you a little bit about these friends and colleagues of mine, Dean Polendo is a professor and former chair in the Department of Drama and founding director of Tisch's Innovation Studio. He previously served as associate dean for the Institute of Performing Arts. A distinguished arts educator, Rubén began his career at NYU as founding director of the theater program at NYU Abu Dhabi and associate dean for NYU Abu Dhabi's Arts Center, where he established a vibrant and innovative trans-global theater program and helped to make NYU Abu Dhabi an important cultural destination within the UAE. A committed advocate of interdisciplinary work, he has launched forward-looking initiatives that explore the intersection of performance and technology. Dean Polendo is an internationally recognized artist and the founding artistic director of Theater Mitu. He was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship for his work on AI and performance and was awarded a special Obie for over 25 years of sustained innovation with Mitu. Committed to challenging the parameters of theater research and practice, Polendo's work is situated in the tension between acting and performance, theatrical design and installation, multimedia, and emerging technology. Abhishek Majumdar is a playwright, essayist, scenographer, and director working in India and internationally. His work has been produced and commissioned in leading theaters across the world, including the Royal Court Theatre in London, Prithvi Theatre in Mumbai, San Francisco Opera, and Playco in New York, amongst many others. Abhishek is a recipient of multiple awards working in theater, film, and opera in different languages and cultures. His book of essays, Theater Across Borders, available downstairs, is published by Bloomsbury International as part of the Theater Maker series, and he has been published, performed, and translated in, ready? Hindi, English, French, German, Czech, Kannada, Bengali, Marathi, Kashmiri, and Spanish. Whew. He is the artistic director of Nalanda Arts Studio, Bangalore, and creative producer at New Voices Arts Project, based in Bangalore. His plays are published by Bloomsbury International. Apart from theater, he has published in the areas of mathematics, environmental economics, and chemistry. I hope you'll be talking about those things tonight. So, to get started, theater, politics, and pedagogy in a global context. This conversation between Abhishek and Rubén examines the making and teaching of theater in a global context and centers around two of Majumdar's recently published books, Theater Across Borders and Collected Plays. Both Rubén and Abhishek have spent several years training and working in global contexts, and this dialogue is about their learnings as practitioners and pedagogues. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Catherine. And I want to take a moment to thank Catherine for all the work and the brilliance of bringing this event together and having us join in conversation. I will only add to Abhishek's bio that he is also about one of my favorite people in the world. So, in full transparency, he is a dear friend, a dear colleague, a collaborator, and someone with whom I've shared a lot of long talks about building and rebuilding the world of art that we live in. And so, it really is a pleasure to be here with Abhishek. So, thank you. I'm for those of you who know me, I'm a big thinker on big subjects and big discussions, and so I shared with Abhishek that. I had made a list of really big subjects that he and I have talked about and never finished the damn conversation. And I thought it made sense to perhaps give it another stab in this evening's chat. So if I may, I'll jump in and see what trouble I get us into. I also want to acknowledge that there's a really beautiful legacy bridge between Abhishek and myself. As Catherine shared, I served as the founding director for the theater program for NYU Abu Dhabi. And of course, Abhishek serves as the current director of the program. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get into pedagogy and into the core of the conversation. I also want to lift up again the two beautiful publishings that Abhishek has that are indeed downstairs and here. I'll hold them up in a moment. And again, we'll fold those into the conversation. But one of the things I want to begin with is with this lovely framework of global and the global context. I grew up in northern Mexico on the border with the US, and that really started my own journey, not only culturally and identity-based, but as an artist, it really shaped that. And so often to me, the global framework is almost a little too monolithic for me to sink my teeth into it. And so one of the ways that I often explain and share my experience is rather than thinking of the global, is to think of myself and my work as something that manifests an identity that is more of a borderlander identity. That really sits in a space that travels and engages and interrogates the question of borders. For me, that explains more of not only my view of my work, but also my embodied experience, which is, you know, when I was growing up on the border with Mexico, I always share this, is we used to go get milk on the American side and bread on the Mexican side because my dad didn't like this and my mom didn't like that, right? And that's how porous those borders were. And so the idea of getting towards a goal by way of crossing borders was really embedded in my own embodied experience. And so I say that I offer that framework because if I could put you on the spot, I'd be eager to hear from your experience in a whole other context to talk a little bit about this notion of borderlandness and what that means, or borders at large, and how that plays out in your experience.
Thank you, Ruben. I have to thank everybody who has helped organize this and worked very hard. And Catherine and Ruben, who brought me first to NYU Abu Dhabi several years ago for a 45-minute talk one evening. And I would have never imagined that so many years later we would be so deeply in each other's lives. And thank you to all of you for being here, many of whom are my students, colleagues, friends, people I have collaborated with, looked up to. I'm really grateful that we are meeting here. About borders, you know, the funny thing about, I think, being South Asian is that if you start drawing the border, every 10, 15 years, the border looks differently. You know? So my father was born in undivided India. At some point of time, he moved to India from undivided India, whatever that means to you right now. And the place he left became East Pakistan. By the time he died, there was no East Pakistan and there was Bangladesh, right? So actually the country that he left did not exist by the time he died, right? And this is sort of the story of the region. So I remember once I was filling up a form in UAE for something, and the person told me, write in brackets, erstwhile undivided India, when I had to write my father's place of birth. Because there is no East Pakistan that they can find out, you know, like there's nothing to point at the map. And that tells me something about at least the sense of what was a border for us when we were growing up was, it's very hard to tell because language was one thing that we could hear differently, but it's not possible to speak Urdu without speaking Hindi or speaking Hindi without speaking Urdu. To speak there are places in Bengal, it is extraordinary. Like there are places in Bengal where music, there are songs of that place where the music is written left to right and the song is written right to left. Because Shah Jalal went there in the 14th century, I think, and set up, the Sufi shrines and people learn music. Now, what is the language of that place was always a question in my mind. So, there is a wonderful thing that one of our great novelists, Anantamurthy, who was a writer in Kannada, he used to say that, I'm Indian when I'm outside the country. When I am in the city, then I say I am from this village. When I go to the village, I say I'm from that street. And these are all continuous identities. They are not identities that conflict with each other. And I sort of found that in the theater. I think that was true for the theater. We had continuous identities. And I remember when I met you first, and you had come to Bangalore with Theatre Mitu and your students, I was told the first time that there is some Mexican man who's come with some students, and will you go and meet them? I said, no, come on. I mean, I was like, he come for 3 days and they will self-actualize and then have some dosa and go back. But then they said, he's come again. He's back next year. And then I said, oh, okay, now I should go. And who's this person who's coming every year? And I found that really, really, really inspiring that you took this crossing of the borders, not literally as something like you cross and you come back, but it flowed into your work seamlessly. So that was very inspiring.
I appreciate that, and I have to say that we met in a coffee shop in the middle of Bangalore now over a decade plus ago, and I remember very frankly, Abhishek, after we've been talking for a while, turned to me and said, "So can I just ask you, what does this Mexican guy want with India?" Right? It's an artist, and we had such a great conversation that wasn't about the long history of colonial actions by artists, right? Which is a landscape that in many ways I was trained in when I was in graduate school, which is you go and you get your idea and you come back and then you do your show and the concept is, right? And I felt very fortunate because my interest, because of my own embodied experience, had to do with conversations and curiosities and belief systems, and again, a kind of amplifying of the world versus a kind of taking and co-opting. And I think that's what started. I think we were to meet for an hour, and 4 hours later, we were kicked out of that cafe because we were like, no, but if you do that, right? And I think that really started a conversation about this borderlander kind of view, but playing it out in art and art making. And if I may, one of the things that you mentioned it already in the arts, but I again, Abhishek and I have a lot of spaces in common. Another deep secret you should know is that we're both scientists by training. And so I come out of biochemistry and you come out of abstract math. And so our pathway into the arts is through a whole other vantage point. So we got the borderland equality, we got the scientist brain. And so what happens is there's a way that I think we both approach art making with an inherent inter and transdisciplinarity to it. At least for me, because I came to art making very late, I was always very surprised by the borders that I was presented with. I mean, legitimate borders that I was in graduate school and I said, and I'm thinking of this, ooh, no, that's a little more film. So maybe, this is a theater program. Oh, okay. Well, and this, that's visual art, right? And this, ooh, that's a little more about publishing something. So maybe it does, right? Like all of these borders again and again. And something we talked about was about that again, borderlandness. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that in your work, because I think we get in trouble a lot in a shared way because we are incredibly unconcerned with those borders. If you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting. The thing is, I realized that dance, music, theater, these are different things only after leaving the country. Because if you go to a drama school to learn, say, Kathakali or Kudiyattam or Chhau or any of these forms, as an actor, you have to train in dance, you have to train in rhythm, and you have to train in philosophy, and then, you can turn out to be a pretty bad actor after doing all those things also. That's a different matter, but you have to do all these things. Right? But I was very surprised that when we got into sort of modern training, this is not even actually leaving the country, just modern training was far more conservative than traditional training. There was a lot more about, and by the time you get into this horrible debate about Strasbourg versus Stanislavski, and what does it mean to me sitting in Delhi? Like, how do I care? Like, I don't even know who is from which place. Like, but there is you have people passionately arguing about, this is inner memory, but Stanislavski did not say this, and Strasbourg said this. Sitting in Delhi, I remember we used to have Chekhov plays. So for the longest time in my life, I thought Dario Fo was Bengali, by the way, because I had only seen Dario Fo in Bangla. So I was very surprised to know that Dario Fo is Italian later on. But Chekhov in Delhi used to be in basement theaters, wearing overcoats, you're sweating, and you're telling each other, it's snowing in Moscow. And this is a real thing that, it would happen. But more than this belief was the argument about what is Chekhov and, if it is this or it is that. And you cannot do this. I have rejected from Polish plays for not speaking proper English, which is bizarre, right? Which you feel much later on you realize, but how did the Polish people speak proper English? How did that happen? But this kind of, what I'm actually trying to get at is a lot of this border stuff, whether it's disciplinary or it is just identifying with theater traditions or regions, I find is many a times completely imaginary. It's based on what is convenient for like a classification, It's like in music stores, at some point of time, Indian classical music has moved from classical to meditation, but it's the same music which has traveled. The music has not. I think it's something like that. Do you find that in your work?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you talk about this idea of language, right? How language plays and categories. And I often remind students that it's all invented, right? Like we really do inherit a lot of these divisions with such a kind of, almost like a theological, like this is how it must be. For me, what's been interesting is to see, having been now in the United States for longer than I was in Mexico, to actually see how Mexican culture enters the United States and how it gets reshaped and rebranded. And there's a moment where, going to music, I remember that Mexican music was in global, right? Like when I'd go to record store and it was like the global and international section. It was sort of generically so. And then there was a moment where it was the Latino or the Latin section, right? And that was like we got our own section, right? The rest was global, but like we got this, right? And then you saw the division that it became Brazilian, Mexican. Like you just keep seeing these things, and it has to do with what's easy, with marketing, with so forth. I've now seen it going back to being regrouped, right? As record stores have left, and now it's gone back to a sort of, Latino, Latinx, Latin music. So it's interesting to see that, and to also see it in how we speak of the work. I was sharing with a colleague, and this is perhaps a little too sort of self-serving, but I do have a memory of, with my company, and I point to one of my dear company members here, Michael Littig, and I remember us going to theaters and being really interrogated as to why we wanted computers and screens in the work we were doing, right? This is like 2000. And it was like, no. And truly we were like, no, we have our little TVs. We point to like, hey, you've heard of the Wooster Group? It's kind of, they were like, no, right? You don't need it. This is theater. And you just see these sort of arbitrary kind of divisions, whether they're trends, moments, or so forth. And so for me, I feel like there's always been, I don't know, there's always been a lack of caring for that line, whether it be in language and division, right? I think we also share this, which we're such omnivores even in our music and in our art, right? I know your syllabi, we'll talk about this more, and you know mine, and it isn't about we're teaching theater, so here's theater, here, that's like the last thing on our minds. It's about what the influx of ideas and structures and so forth. And so that those inventions of those divisions to me, in my most naive, I feel like I don't get it. What do we win from it? I understand them, of course. But then it goes to something that you and I often talk about, which is our instinct to build, right? Like we separately and together land in a place where if that which we are making doesn't fit here and there, then we build, right? Can you talk a little bit about the building of your work and your company and that instinct towards building, Abhishek?
The first company I founded in India was the Indian Ensemble, which I was the artistic director for about 10 years in Bangalore. And the idea for Indian Ensemble really was to be a collaborative company which worked on new work. And we had a mix of sort of devising and written work. And then eventually that company shaped into a repertory almost. And there was a need to get out of the repertory model. So someone else took over that company and ran it actually very successfully. And I started this other company, the Nalanda Art Studio, which collaborates with other companies in other regions to create work in different languages and different forms. Far more varied, I would say, than Indian Ensemble in terms of language because it can collaborate with other companies, whereas Indian Ensemble's strength was to collaborate within the same, mostly Hindi work, which was also very exciting. But this was a different, this needed a different container. And when I started, the only unit that I felt I understood and people around me understood was the family. You know, because most of us came from that tradition of, you know, like my cousins used to have a theater company. So, you know, one uncle is doing this and my aunt is doing that and I'm doing something. Like we were all sort of in this mix. And then they were like, I didn't realize till I went to England to drama school that cousins are not siblings. You know, like I didn't realize, like all of them were my brothers and sisters. People used to ask me, how many brothers and siblings are you? I would say 5 or 7. Then I used to say, this is my cousin brother and this is my cousin sister. Till I realized that, oh, but cousin brother is not a brother, it's a cousin, it's something else. But this unit of theater making was in a way the family, and which included the neighbor and, you know, all of this. And I thought that people understood. That's a language that we understood, that if you kind of look at in our theater company at that time, there were 3 age groups. There were the very young who would come in, and people used to joke that you should put up a board outside Indian Ensemble which says, caution, trespassers will be cast. We used to find, you know, somebody would come and sit, and after 3 months, that person is in a show. Then, yes, you're in, you know, and then that's it. So we had that group of people. We had the people who were much older than us, who had more experience, and who were guiding the company in some way. But most of us in our sort of mid-20s to, say, 50s, were really doing a lot of the running of the company, and that was understood to be the system. It has changed now. Even in India, that has changed. There has been need for certain other professional practices to be brought in along with this to be able to sustain companies and also have opportunities for various people. So the building itself, I think the mechanics of the building has changed. Abu Dhabi was very exciting when I went. I actually never thought that I will be, the program head of this program. I went for, like I said, for one evening, and then one day I found, okay, this is what is happening. For me, the greatest challenge was that, I was used to building in a place with less resources. And I understood the challenges of that. And now I understand the challenges of building in a place with more resources. I used to believe that if you have a lot of resources, then that's it. You will be able to do a lot of things. But sometimes resources can also be crippling in a different way, which is something I learned later. I used to go back home and say, why are people, what are people arguing about? We have so much. But sometimes, and of course, we are in hugely international campus, not only in terms of, I think the most beautiful thing in Abu Dhabi is if you're in the classroom, right, and if you say theater, it means completely different things to the students. For one student, it's a folk performance in Pakistan. For the other, it's a street play in Morocco. The third, it's a play on Broadway. And we are trying to think about what is theater for us. But so is it for faculty. We are all from different practices with completely different backgrounds. So building in Abu Dhabi is a different challenge than the one I was used to. Yeah.
And so let's jump to that, and I'll go back to building in a moment. And as I know your work as an artist, as a builder, there's a moment where I feel, and you and I have talked about this, where the moniker that has to do with one of our main crafts, playwright, director, that there's a moment where we redefine what that meant, right? That it wasn't just a writer, that it felt like, as you're saying, scenography, making, directing, building, and so forth. When did that moment arrive for you? Did it arrive quite naturally? Because by the time that I met you and we started doing the work in Abu Dhabi, that building came very naturally. In other words, I would argue that, like me, you don't know how not to think about the build, right? You don't think about a little pristine project and you hope that it happens somewhere. There's an immediate larger conversation. I'm wondering how that developed or got to so that it could shape what is now the vision of a theater program.
In my growing up years, in my family's cousins' theater company, the only thing I did was to bring tea. Right. And that was the training. You just brought tea for everybody and stood and watched what people did. And when someone forgot something, they said, go down. So and so has forgotten this thing, and you went down and you brought it, and you did that. And then at some point of time, you realize you know all the lines because you've been hanging around getting tea. And then one day someone says, oh, so and so is late. Will you take the lines of that third soldier? And you're like, of course, I will do it. But first you will bring tea, and then you will take the lines of that. All right, I'll do it. Yeah. I found that irritating at that time, but I think something of that helped me eventually. Especially, I think with the theater, everywhere that I'm really attached to in the theater, that the Tibetan community that I've worked with, or in Kashmir, or various places of conflict where theater has made a huge practical and deep impact for the people who live there. This nature of building with like holding hands and saying, okay, you do this, I'm going to do this, I've got your back. Without a sort of very, it not being a pyramid. It's not like there are very few people at the top and a lot of people here. It's actually, there is no pyramid. So you're going to bring tea, and even now if I go to that theater company, I'm still bringing tea. Yeah. And that's fine, because it's not like, it doesn't change in that way. I think that has helped me, at least, in my way of building things. Yeah.
You said something, this we hadn't talked about in a while, but you said something to me and a group of students a long time ago. It always stayed with me, which is the students were talking about different limits and sometimes feeling like you're not giving permission to do certain things and that you're trying to sort of follow the rules they were asking. And you said, and they felt a little left out of that. And you said, no one invited you to the theater to be an artist. And so therefore no one could uninvite you from being an artist. Could you talk about that a little bit? Because I think it has to do with some of this, right?
Yeah, I think, many a times in terms of censorship, I've felt, like I've been to police stations and this and that, behind bars for writing plays. But every time something like that comes up, which is quite serious sometimes, right? Right now in India, even more, with our sort of right-leaning government. Just a few months ago, I was interrogated for a very long time. But whenever that's happening, I kept thinking that, but I didn't come into the theater by taking permission from the government. I'm not going to leave the theater because you don't like it. What's the point of doing all this? I mean, okay, you're going to make it difficult for. And I want to share that always with my students, because I find that, again, in a place like Abu Dhabi, and probably that is true for here as well, you should tell me. Students come from so many different places with one idea of what is global. And that idea is that it is better. Where do people go to be global? Is to a place which is, where there is electricity 24 hours. That's where you go to be global. It doesn't work the other way around. It's not like people have study aways in large groups and go and stay in a place where there is less. But then when they reach there, they realize that that is actually nothing. That is not global. The global is not the shiny mall in Abu Dhabi or, the global is something else. The global is that we have to figure out something beyond the way we look, beyond the way, beyond our aspiration, let's say. Because, we have students coming from so many parts of the world where, Ukrainian kids, they grew up in front of our eyes, right? In my students who were sitting and saying, I'm thinking, where will I go for a holiday? In 1 month, they were saying, I don't know if my brother is all right back home. The world has changed so much in front of our eyes, and that this global affects everybody. The kids who were not Ukrainian, they really were affected by this war, are affected even now, right? And I think that is the sort of, that's where they have to think that I wasn't, like nobody's going to tell you that, come, be in the theater. At the end of this program, we'll have a placement cell which will place you in this consulting job. But it is going to shape you in a way, I think, that will... You said something about theater being a field and not a job, which I also share. Look at us. We are just full of quotes about each other. Yes. Yes. There must be a talk show like this on television, which must be very, very popular, where people quote each other. But you did say, which I was telling you earlier, that that's such a wonderful thing, that you think of it as a field. And maybe you can speak to us about that.
Yeah, yes. And I want to go back to the scenario you just described as students, but what Abhishek is naming is something that I have argued and continue to argue, and very much I'm committed to this in the work we're doing at Tisch, which is, I think what we do, I'll speak about Tisch, though I think it applies as well to NYU Abu Dhabi's arts and theater program. I think what we do so well is we prepare students for the field. And I think the categorical error we make is that we claim to prepare them only for the industry. And to me, the industry is this very small, economically viable, yes, it can be exciting, part of the field. But what our graduates do so well when they graduate is, sure, you can do a film and get an Oscar, but you should also be able to publish a book and collaborate with game designers and travel across the world in a political action, engage in pedagogy, come back and do a Netflix show, engage in things you didn't even know you were going to do, right? That you're navigating the field. And that to me creates sustainability. And our alums model that so beautifully as I see different folks, because that is how we shape the field. And I think that's what we do so well. instead of only limiting it to one thing. I used to joke that many, many moons ago, and I was happy to, when I was chair of the drama department, to change this, is there used to be this little bulletin board of success, right? So it was, we have these many Tony Award winners, we have these many Oscar winners. And I kept thinking, where is everybody else? Like, I actually know dozens and dozens. One of our alums is the cultural attaché for the U.S. Embassy in Argentina. Where is her work here, right? And I recognize some of our students leave the field and become dentists. They'll be great dentists, great. But I am really, really engaged in celebrating folks in the field. And that allows for a really capacious view of the work. And it allows for, this borderlandness, right? Which I'm always interested in, that movement and that migration in a lot of ways. When you speak of that classroom, I am reminded of this framework, and it's a little heady, though we've talked about this, which is Alejandro Jodorowsky, Chilean filmmaker, theater maker, speaks of something that he calls the global imagination, right? And what he talks about is this idea that the global imagination uses nostalgia to map culture. And in a very Jodorowsky way, it's a little puzzle in there, right? But it's idea of not nostalgia as reminiscing or as forlorn, but as a tool with which to map, right? And I say that because having seen your work, thank you, Abhishek, having seen your work, there's always for me this tension in the work, and I think it's also in your pedagogy, which we'll go to, but in the work that I've seen of yours, from the show that I saw here in New York through the piece that I saw in Bangalore, there's always this really remarkable engagement with a kind of cultural nostalgia, but it isn't nostalgic, right? There is this mapping out of that which was there before, and then I get lost in the Jodorowsky equation. But I'm wondering if any of those words resonate for your work and for this sort of space of the quote-unquote global imagination.
I think the two shows that you saw, one was #Supernova in Bangalore, which was a show about trafficking. And in the show, we had the audience came in, and they would, while the show is going on, they would be on their smartphones chatting with people in our back end. And it was about how sex trafficking happens through the internet. And that part of being able to get intimate with someone you don't know on a chat was created during the show. So you saw the show, and from time to time you would see the texts. And the second one was 9 Kinds of Silence, which you saw here. I think maybe in our, in India, I find that if you walk, this might be true again of here. Everything that I'm saying is true of many places. I'm just talking about the place that I know best. If you walk 100 meters in India, it's possible to see the most contemporary modern technology and a 1400-year-old mosque and a, so all of this, and all of it is functional. Nothing is, equally functional or equally dysfunctional, but it's all there. So it's sort of impossible to create work about India, which is what most of the times I think I do, or that part of the world, by being in one timeline. These multiple timelines, they exist together. Maybe it's because of that the word nostalgia has some resonance. But I have never thought of it as nostalgia. Yeah. Although I have nostalgia about things, but in the shows I feel these characters, there's no escaping the past, because the past is not gone. It's here right now. Do you find that in your Hamlet, for example, had a lot of shades of that with all the modern technology it used in, didn't it?
I think that's right. I mean, I think that you're pointing to an image that I think is maybe a more apt description, which I'll speak culturally first and then of the work, which is I often describe the experience of going to Mexico for me as a vertical experience, right? Which is to say that what you just described could also happen in a street in a small town in Mexico, which is you're passing by an old indigenous site, and next to it is a Gucci store, and next to it is, you know, a sacred mound, and then someone is, you know, shooting for TikTok. Like all this is happening at the same time. And so there's a kind of verticality to the time experience. And I feel like somewhere in there is memory, maybe nostalgia is not the right word, the present, the future. That kind of verticality is, to me, really important in the dramaturgy of my company's work, which is because we work with technology, there's a way that it wants to be shiny and future facing, right? The project they're working on now is working with artificial intelligence and robots, yet the project is about the history of God, right? And so this kind of tension is interesting to me because I do feel that we are actually replicating this theological exercise of reinventing God as we invent artificial intelligence. And so I don't think it's just about ourselves in the future. I think we have a long legacy of putting our faith and our inventions in this kind of unknown space. And so that tension, that verticality is not only interesting, but it's a big driving force for the work. And as I hear you describe your work and the things we've discussed, how does that go into your teaching space, into your pedagogy, particularly as you now head the theater program and have for a few years, not only into the classroom, but into the vision of how we train our future colleagues. What are your thoughts on that, bridging into that?
Yeah. I think, you know, with students and with colleagues who are younger, it's really, I have to play catch up most of the times because they're ahead in terms of what they know about technology, about usage of technology. I'm teaching a course next semester. It's the first time I'm teaching this course, which is called Tech Performances and Society. It's a course which is cross-listed with philosophy and interactive media, and it's a theater class. But it thinks about all kinds of technological performances. So I'll pick your brain about the thing that you're making. And while I was designing this course, I realized that I'm deeply interested in actually whose future are technological performances imagining. Because I know lots of places where the future new technology has just allowed people to gamble on a smartphone, but not brought irrigation. I mean, that is also true of technology, that it can come to a place with only certain kind of very basic benefits and not the actual benefits that it can bring. So all this business of the Museum of the Future, for example, that we have in Dubai, whose future is it imagining? And what kind of imagination of the future? That's what we are thinking about in that class. But I'm also deeply aware that I didn't grow up with computers, right? I mean, the first time I saw the internet, my brother-in-law showed me in his office. I thought he was breaking a rule, you know. It was like we used to have, internet, we used to have these slips. You go to a cyber cafe and it was half an hour in which, and in half an hour you had to do whatever you needed to do, whether you had to write a love letter or a SOP or you had to crack an exam, that was it. The relationship that my students have to technology is very different from mine. It's very acquired. My daughter, my God, she's like miles ahead of me in terms of her ease with picking up something and trying to figure it out. I think all of us experience that. So on one hand, I like thinking about it and doing something about the philosophical aspects of it. But maybe there is a lot of catch up to do in terms of what future people are imagining. I think the only major possibility I have is to make my younger colleagues and students think with me about, is this for everybody? And how do we do that? That's something I can think about. But rest of it is ahead of me. I'm playing catch up.
And what I'm hearing you talk about is also just plurality, right? So when you speak of future as plural, futures, I have a great interest in that. We did a a project a few years back with my company. It was right in the middle, near the end of the pandemic, and we, on a just personal note, felt very hopeless. Right, it's that terrible moment where we were calling people and saying, "Are you washing your apples? You know what's happening?" Right, it was that upside down, and a company member, one of my company members at Theater Mitu, had this really pure instinct, which is to put up a flyer with no description that said, "Call this number and tell us how you imagine a more perfect future." And it had like a little Saturn planet, right? That's it. We said, no one's going to call. Hundreds of people called, like hundreds of people called. They told us, they gave us political rants, they prayed for us, they put their children on the phone, they sang for us, and they talked about the future. And I say that because, oh, so naively, right? Here I am talking about the field and globality and so forth, or globalization. And I felt like I had created a monolith of this idea of future, and all of a sudden was confronted with hundreds of hours of futures, right? Of all of these futures, so that the future of somebody who was calling from a small town and they had kids was different than what I could hear to be a young artist in New York, than what I could hear, et cetera, et cetera. And so this gave shape to a piece called Utopian Hotline, where we collected that archive and really bring you into that, traveling through that archive. But I say that because it really opened up for me not only my own personal view, but actually my teaching, the pedagogy, which is this to really move away from a kind of space that I was trained in, which I was trained in, you know, the arts and the theater, right? Versus the theaters and the many, many, many shapes of things. And so as I hear you speak of this, I am reminded not only of that, but also of your room as I've seen it. So could you talk about that, how plurality plays into your room? How do you in fact address the question of having students from all over the world sitting in one classroom without the famed one point of reference, right?
I mean, in some sense, I would have to say that having taught in India really helped me with plurality, because it is very plural. Because there are so many Indias within India, right? In terms of language, in terms of economic background, in terms of regions. It's like in India, if I'm teaching a class, I could never give an example of a play and assume that everybody knows that example, right? It would just, that wouldn't happen. So I found that to be very useful training ground to be able to do classes in Abu Dhabi. What is absolutely fascinating about Abu Dhabi is that this is multiplied into by so many times, because you're having to like know something about, okay, so what are the Moroccan plays that I can bring to class, because I have this student who has this frame, you know. It is really a lot through dialogue, I think, a lot through letting students create their work in a way that they want to create. And yet, I mean, I know I'm not saying anything profound, except that this is profoundly different from the way I was trained. You know, I was trained in classrooms where you did not speak. To go into classrooms where the logic is that, the idea is that they should be speaking to each other. You feel like, why are they paying me if these guys are going to talk to each other? You know, like, they're going to learn from each other. What the hell? Like, what am I? You know, is this bad for me? Is this good for me? So I think this is a huge change to move into that space. And another very interesting thing about actually, so when you founded this program, it instilled a bunch of things in that program, which was a sense of experimentation. So recently I was talking to a student who was telling me that, you know, some students are unhappy on campus that we are not doing a musical every year, you know. And I said, yeah, I said, but you know, the thing is, we could, but we are not that program. We are this program. And then invariably someone blamed you, which was good for me. I was thinking, you know, I mean, I behaved as if, you know, if it was left to me, if I had formed this program, we would just do musicals. But Ruben kind of destroyed it by bringing all this experimentation. So we still use you to get out of sticky situations. But on a serious note, that I think the students are also negotiating this. I don't know why, actually. Now, like in NYU Abu Dhabi, you know, you just get books. right? You have books assigned. I don't know, is it the same here? You get all the books? So in NYU, you get all the books. So when they
Abu
started...
Dhabi pays for your books.
Yeah.
This is what I'm
So you
checking.
get whatever books you want. And I used to be shocked by this earlier. That really, like all these books are, they're just, I mean, even as a professor, I used to think, are these books mine? Do I keep them? What's going on, right? This excess, this availability itself is something that I have had to struggle with. It's not natural for me to feel that, okay, now we have these books and we can, go for it. Or the NYU library system, right? You go somewhere and if the book is not in that library, then it will have to be in some other library, or it will be in some other library and it will come to you. This might seem normal for a lot of places, but I didn't find it normal at all. I was delighted that this could happen. But it also takes training to be able to use the benefits of a different pedagogical idea. And it took me a lot of time.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and thanks for throwing me under the bus even now on things. I appreciate that. But as you speak of that, and then we'll open it up. We have time for a few questions. Abhishek, I hold very special the classroom in Abu Dhabi. It's a really special place. I have a different value and equally special in a different way for the classroom here. I will be in Abu Dhabi in the J term teaching. And what's interesting that to me, when I started teaching, when we started the program, was the fact that even forget the art reference, just the human reference was not a common one. So if a student, let's say a student from North America, from the US said, hey, well, you know that thing when you're waiting for the school bus? And the rest of the students would say, I have no idea what you're talking about. No idea. Where I grew up, there was no such thing, right? And so there wasn't even a kind of cadence to that referencing. And so I had, as you're saying, to learn from them how they were navigating, which is, in fact, it wasn't about not making that reference, but it was about not assuming that it was a shared reference. And it was about actually giving light and color and shade and emotion to that reference, to why they were bringing it up. And so I realized that it was about, yes, the tools, yes, the curiosity, yes, everything that we could see, but it was about the specificity in some ways. I remember getting a lot of grief, and I don't know if you still have it. We had something called student-led projects, which were these fully manifested projects with students right off from their first year. And I remember the pushback was, whoa, they're not ready to do that. They should wait till their fourth year. And I thought, this is the only way to do that, so that the images, the making is like theirs, right? So that they are arguing and actually generating new knowledge in their own practice. And it was terrific because you saw these very different manifestations of the questions that we were navigating in the room. And there were no musicals, but alas, there was a lot of really earnest and really failed experiments. And that became a kind of culture of making that was about the learning and the research, not just, it's a hit. It got a lot of applause. It made everybody laugh, right? And to really look at that space as a laboratory, which I feel very moved by, very proud of that work that you all continue to do. Yeah, I'm going to open it up to questions. Is that okay? I think we have time for a couple of questions.